there's about 15 different colors on your calendar, and like almost every hour of every day is yes, because if I don't put the thing in the calendar, it will not happen. And if I want multiple things to happen, then there has to be a start time and stop time for every activity. So if I'm going to be writing and recording audio fiction, there has to be a time slot for that. Usually when there's not fire engines and buses going by. If I'm going to, if I have to set out a block of time every day to do client work, I have to set out, there's got to be 8 hours to sleep. There's got to be time to drink bourbon. It's all in the calendar. Oh, you better believe it's in the calendar.
Hi, this is Adam Freeman. I am bringing you, this is not a good intro. Hi, I'm Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where I get to talk to the people behind the scenes of the comic book industry. I get to talk to my friends who happen to work in comics, and that's one of those this week. Gamal Hennessey is a lawyer that I have worked with, and many people in comics have. He is a font of knowledge about things like the reality and value of contracts for everyone in comics, along with the realities of your IP in Hollywood. Gamal has worked at Marvel Comics. He has been a lawyer for many, many years. He worked as a nightlife entrepreneur. He's a font of energy and information, and as a published expert on the business of comics. But I have to say that my favorite piece of this whole interview is when Gamal digs into the mechanics of how he gets so much done in a day, how he's able to follow so many different interests and passions and make time for all of them. Gamal is a truly, truly fascinating man. I can't wait to introduce him to all of you. And we'll do that right after a message from our sponsor. This week's episode is brought to you by our friends at Manage Comics. Are you tired of outdated, clunky software running your shop? Manage Comics is the modern solution for comic store owners who want a smarter, easier way to manage their shop. It's built on Shopify, the world's #1 e-commerce platform. With an integrated POS system, Manage Comics saves you time and makes more money by giving customers the power to manage their own subscriptions. Upgrade to a simpler system that works for you, not against you. And I'm going to go off script in here and say, I love Manage Comics. There are other solutions out there that are also really good, but there's a reason that we're so close to Brian Garside and work with him and his team. Manage Comics is a really wonderful tool for any comic shop owner. You should join their next webinar and see the difference for yourself. Visit managecomics.com/webinar today. And make sure you told them that we sent you. Gamal, welcome to the show. So
Thank
happy
you,
to
sir.
have you here.
I am proud to be here. I've seen the list of people who have been here before. It's a very prestigious list of people.
Oh, well, thank you. I started this off just to chat with my friends about, the stuff that we talk about that never gets talked about in public. So it's nice when people want to, then people I don't know want to get involved. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah. I mean, I figured I'd be here sooner or later, considering many the times we've had dinner and drinks and all that stuff.
True.
It's like, yeah, it's just a matter of time. It's fine.
It's just a matter of time. I wanted to start this off not talking about the thing that I'm sure you're brought on to discuss the most, which is, contract law and how people interact with each other in a business forum. I really wanted to talk for a moment about who is Warren Baker.
Wow, people are right. Your research is very, very deep. Warren Baker is the best way to describe him is kind of like a Nick Fury type character. In 2010, 2011, 2012, I read a lot of espionage fiction, and I watched a lot of it on, TV and movies. And I realized that there was a problem, not a problem. There was an oversaturation of what I referred to at that point as the JBs. The JBs being James Bond, Jason Bourne, and Jack Bauer for all of you who remember 24. And
Yeah.
they all had a very similar tone and through line, and the core problem was they all held them out in the marketing. They held them out themselves as spies, but they were literally the worst spies anyone has ever actually seen. If you actually understand what a spy is someone who actually gathers information without anyone else knowing about it. There's
Right.
not satellites exploding. There's not guys with metal teeth biting through the Eiffel Tower. There's not, car chases where dozens and dozens of people are dead. And this is not a new kind of critique of the genre. Jean Le Carré, the famous author of espionage fiction, specifically wrote his books as a counterpoint to Ian Fleming when Ian Fleming was doing James Bond. So I created this kind of a multi-series narrative that's actually up there in the books that did not sell thousands of copies. And it was called the Honey Trap series. The Honey Trap series, because Honey Trap is a very specific espionage technique. And the entire arc of the novels, and there was 6 novels? 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on a second. 6 novels, yes. Explored the kind of nuances of that technique. And Warren Baker was the person that brought this kind of team together to work against an alternative. Basically, it was a human trafficking ring. Was the antagonist
right on.
in that series. And Warren Baker was kind of like I said, he was kind of like the Nick Fury character who had his own reasons for pulling that team together, which is one of the other things that was a problem with a lot of the stuff that you read in modern espionage fiction. It's always just one person, it's one maverick lone wolf spy who goes off and does all the. No, that's not actually how it works. It's usually a very, very large team of people who, and this is going to be a weird tangent. Have you ever seen the Extraction movies?
Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I actually appreciated about those movies that they told this kind of, they showed something behind the scenes of any espionage activity that showed dozens and dozens of people working on forgeries, working on getting material, working on making sure there were safe houses, making sure the things that in most of these books and movies, it just happens. Like, we because we want to be a globe spanning adventure, we're just going to move around the globe. We're not going to talk about visas, passports, checkpoints, like
travel time.
Exactly. Yeah. Travel time, fatigue, nothing. We're not going to talk about any of those things. But those movies, and they didn't have to do. Yeah.
Jet lag does not exist for James Bond. The JBs, no jet lag.
No. Yeah. I mean, 24 was the most egregious, culprit in this, because I'm pretty sure he got kidnapped, escaped, went to Mexico, came back from Mexico multiple times, and never got stuck in LA traffic, all in 24 hours.
Oh my God. Tell me about it. I was just watching, you have Daredevil back there. I was just watching Daredevil, and at least they're no longer spending all their time talking about Hell's Kitchen. Right. It's now New York again. But like my favorite was this last episode was them in Red Hook talking about what a shithole this place. Have you been to Red Hook? You're not bombed out here. That's not Red Hook. Red Hook has, I don't know. You can't afford Red Hook. You can't even afford to stand there in Red Hook. Yeah. No way. Anyway,
exactly. Well, when Daredevil was first on Netflix, I remember putting up a post that said, okay, I can accept talking raccoons. I can accept walking trees. I can accept the guy, the demon from hell who just decided to ride a Harley. I'm not accepting that this lawyer who makes no money got a loft apartment in Hell's Kitchen. No. We're done. Forget it. Hang it up.
No. Also, having a real hard time with that church having all that basement and nobody ever goes down there. That's that's a lot of real estate
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that would be used
Oh
100%.
yeah.
All right. Anyway, sorry. Thank you for coming to our comics podcast where we bitch about Daredevil. All right. Well, before we dig into who is Gamal, and I think one of my favorite parts about this project is that I get to talk to people who, like I said, I think of as my friends, and I get to like do some research and dig in a way that would be really creepy if we were just having dinner. You know, it
Yes.
would. It would. But before we dig into that and to transition out of our rants about the JBs, um,
Wait, I want to say one thing
oh
before
please,
before I lose the thread.
let's.
It would have been rather odd if you asked me like who Warren Baker was when we sat down to dinner. But as a writer who has not sold that many books, if you turned to me and asked me that question, I would have immediately paid for the entire dinner because that means at least one more person read these things. And as a writer who is not like J.K. Rowling or James Patterson or somebody like that, it would have made my day. So yes, it would have been weird, but it would have worked out to your benefit anyway. I mean,
You know what? I actually have a comics business question I wanted to talk about before we talk about the history of Gamal. But before we even do that,
mhm.
you, in the time I have known you, you've not only have you launched, you've gotten involved in Comics Experience, and you guys have launched that Discord, and you've done so much there. You have helped me through several different writing different contracts and understanding things legally. Like as a small company, like you've been invaluable. I know that you've worked with dozens of other clients. At the same time, you also do like audio presentations. You're writing novels.
Mhm.
Like, when do you sleep?
Oh well.
I've seen you. You're fairly fit. I assume there's some sort of exercise routine, but like, how are you packing all this in a day?
Okay, the secret is,
Yeah.
and this is going to sound cliche, the secret is basically just time management. You,
Yeah.
if I'm going to do, and the fact that I don't actually watch a huge amount of TV. So like I've seen Daredevil, sure, but
Yeah.
I've got dozens of pictures of Daredevil on my wall. I've got Daredevil graphic novels. There's probably a Funko of some Daredevil thing back there. I
Yeah.
mean, I watch that. But other than that, I have huge queues in my Netflix queue, Hulu,
Mm-hmm.
Amazon, yeah, that are probably never going to get watched because I've got things going on and my calendar. And this, when I, because I work with Andy, so every once in a while we're sharing screens and he sees my calendar and he goes, "There's about 15 different colors on your calendar." And like almost every hour of every day is, yes, because if I don't put the thing in the calendar, it will
Yes.
not happen. And if I want multiple things to happen, then there has to be a start time and stop time for every activity. So if I'm going to be writing and recording audio fiction, there has to be a time slot for that. Usually when there's not fire engines and buses going by. If I have to set out a block of time every day to do client work. I have to set out, there's got to be 8 hours to sleep. There's got to be time to drink bourbon. It's all in the calendar.
The bourbon is in the calendar.
Oh, you better believe it's in the calendar, right?
Good for you. You know what? This has been my life hack actually this year. Really, I've leaned into this is that I no longer have to-do lists.
Hmm.
I have calendar blocks,
Yes,
right?
because a to-do
That's
list is what was the quote from The Way of the Gun?
Hmm.
Plan is just a list of things that don't happen.
Yeah.
So don't make a to-do list. Put it in the calendar with a specific block of time. And the
Mm-hmm.
other hack is put in more time for that activity than you reasonably think it's going to take. Because you will get distracted, there will be delays, you will get thrown off schedule. And if you put in the exact amount of time, you will always be late. If you put in more time, you will be on time even when you get thrown off course.
It's really funny we're having this conversation because just this week I've developed this game with myself where so at the beginning of the week I go through and here's the things I need to do this week, and I block out the times, and then when I reach that block, my game with myself is, can I do it in half this time?
Okay.
Right? So can I get it done in half the time? Because you're right. There's going to be a text. There's going to be, something's going to happen. The kid is going to need me, like, something. And so if I get it done in half the time, and it's like a little vacation in the day. I get to do whatever I want for the next,
Exactly.
12 minutes. So
exactly.
yeah.
And if you keep doing that, you can be like I just did. I figured out yesterday that I just put in 105 hours into Baldur's Gate 3. So in addition to all that, and I put in the time for the video game. So yeah, because it's in the calendar.
100%. I love that. All right. Now, we've done a digression on top of a digression on top of a digression. I want to do one
This is
business
exactly
story.
like our dinner, yes.
Exactly. And then we're going to get into the history of Gamal, which will also be creepy, but in a good way. What is the biggest difference in the business of being a freelance creator now versus when you started your practice in, I think it was 2004? So that's 20 years. What is the difference between then and now?
Biggest difference, well, this is going to actually segue quite nicely into our discussion about the history of Gamal, because when I was at Marvel, which is like the second major job I had, one of the things that I had to do as the international publishing manager was get all of the freelance talent to sign the contract so they can start working on the books with the editor. Editor brought in the talent. I got them to sign the contract. Once the contract was signed, you tell the editor, okay, that person is good to go. The people would come in the door, and the people 99.9% of the time grew up on Marvel Comics. They loved Marvel Comics more than they loved members of their own family, because the comics actually got them through, dealing with their family and friends and school and whatever. So when someone told them, hey, you're going to be drawing a couple filler pages for Wolverine, the only thing they ever wanted to do in life was do that. So when they walk up to me and I hand them the contract and I say, hey, take this to your lawyer, let them read it, let me know if you guys have any questions or thoughts. I was there for maybe 2 weeks before I realized none of these people had lawyers. None of them were even going to read the contract. And if they did read the contract, they weren't going to know what it said. And none of that was going to change anything. They were going to sign whatever I put in front of him. I could have been Mephisto handing them a contract and saying, sign this if you want to draw Wolverine. They would have signed it.
Yeah.
And that's not, from a professional lawyer's perspective, a good idea. So when I left Marvel, one of the first things I did was I started creative contract consulting to, at the very least, help people understand what they were signing. They didn't have leverage because they were like, a writer. Marvel was Marvel. They weren't even owned by DC, but they were still one of the big two. They had all the leverage. So I wasn't, in most cases, trying to negotiate better deals for them. I was trying to help them understand what the deal was. So at least they took the bad deal with open eyes. But the industry itself expanded and multiplied into a lot of different opportunities. Post-Image, you had a lot of people coming through with the creator-owned publishers started to pop up. Those deals could be, from a work-for-hire freelance standpoint, could be much more flexible. So you can fight for more. You had, after that, crowdfunding became a thing, and people started to publish books on their own. And now, freelance talent, you could get a page rate up front. You could get some royalties on the back end. You could buy some comics wholesale, sell them upsell them with your signature. There was a lot of different ways that a freelancer could dip in and make a living. And some of them flipped over and became independent publishers themselves, because with the growth of high-speed internet, you had a lot more opportunities for people to go, well, I don't want to just go with Marvel or DC. I want to produce my own book. Then the webtoon thing happened, and it was that entire new line of business. A lot of the digital platforms popped up. So now you have what used to be perceived as a monolithic kind of situation where there was only one way to actually be a success and one way to actually get paid has now fractured and multiplies into a lot of different things. But with that multiplication, you now have to make decisions. Before it was just like, well, I'm going to keep knocking on DC's door till they open it. That was the decision. You didn't have to do anything else. Now it's like, well, do I want to work in the webtoon space? Do I want to work in the crowdfunding space? Do I want to do some creator owned projects? Do I want to have my own project? So navigating all that and understanding that each one has its own benefits and detriments. Each one has its own time management kind of situations. Each one of them has their own cycles of when and if you'll ever be paid.
Right.
So helping people understand how the industry changes is the biggest difference between before it's like, well, you shouldn't sign this because it's a bad deal and here's why, to there's 30 different types of deals you can get. Which one is going to fit with you right now for this particular book? Let's talk about it. That it's just the expansion of complexity, basically, which is why we have comics experience and the Discord and the lessons and everything else, because things are changing all the time. When I published this book, it was 2020, and there was a major chapter on, how to position your book best to get into Diamond. Because if
Right.
you want to be in the direct market, you had to be in Diamond. This book got published in June of 2020, June or July. Diamond shut down its operations in March, and then DC left Diamond shortly thereafter, and now we all know where Diamond is now. So there was a whole chapter in there that's old as soon as the book gets printed. So it was the
Sure.
idea of making content updates of the book or creating something like Comics Experience where you can constantly give them the book as the foundation, let them kind of understand the baseline of how the industry works. But as all of these new permutations pop up and all these new things happen, we constantly discuss and talk about it so everyone understands how the paradigm is shifting and how it actually impacts the book that they're making right now.
Do nonfiction books, would you say, just as a general rule, and this is someone as coming as someone who loves to read nonfiction, like that most of what I do read these days is nonfiction. People ask me what comics I'm reading, and it's the ones I get paid for to read, and whatever nonfiction book I'm reading at the time. Do you think they still have a place, especially in anything where it's a dynamic, where something is relevant in the moment? Like, is there I mean, as someone who has written a book, I've never gone through that process. I look at what you've created here, and I think, each one of these pages had to have taken, days for research and or getting it right and being comfortable with it. And I'm assuming you argued with Joe Illidge about, what was going in and what was not going in. All of that. Would you put out this book today, or is it still relevant?
I would. Not only would I put out the book today, I'm actually considering, because the book came out in 2020, doing a second edition, because there are things that need to be pulled out, there are things that need to be pulled in. And I think for a book like this, where it's related to a specific industry that is always changing, the book is still valid and relevant because everyone needs kind of a baseline. I think the problem I was trying to solve with the book in the first instance was I was meeting so many talented and creative people who went to school and either got a degree in illustration or they got their MFA, and they were very good at the craft of making comics. But at no point in that education did anyone sit them down and say, okay, this is what a copyright is.
Right.
This is how a contract is structured. This is how page rates work. This is what page rate you need to ask for or not ask for. This is what marketing is. No one ever told them that. So they just kind of took these highly talented and creative people and just threw them out into the world with no understanding of what it is they were supposed to be doing. They just had a pencil in one hand and a tablet in the other. It's like, I like Spider-Man. Like, okay, how is that? So this book was help just to give them that foundation so they can go, okay, now I understand how it works. I know the things are shifting and things are moving, but I know how it works so I can actually deal with it in a way that makes sense, or which I think is something that I don't really talk about enough is I think there's a probably dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people who love comics who read that book and said, I don't want to do this. And I think
Mm.
that saved some people
Mm-hmm.
years of their life, thousands of dollars, and a lot of like points in the blood pressure, not getting into something because they love comics. The core problem in comics on the creative side, and it's not necessarily a problem, but it's the core challenge is everyone in comics loves comics.
Right.
And
Because there's
like
no
anything,
money in it.
right, if anything else you love, you're going to make bad decisions.
Right.
A hedge fund manager does not love the companies that they are dealing with. In fact,
Yeah.
they may not know anything about them. So they
Right.
will always make decisions based on how financially prudent it is, which is why they have yachts and Lamborghinis and stuff like that. Comic book creators love comics. So they are constantly making decisions based on their love of comics, not necessarily prudent business decisions.
You know, what's interesting is obviously everybody that you and I deal with on a daily basis works in comics, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I won't say I don't know if your practice leads outside of comics, but for me, everyone I deal with every day is talks about the business of comics. And it's really getting to know this system when you try and introduce it to somebody from the outside. They're like, what? This makes no
Mhm.
sense at all. And, you
Mhm.
know, it just occurred to me as you're talking about this is that it's because it's a system that was developed by people who love comics. That's it.
Yes.
That all of it was designed for the perpetuation and building of comics and comic shops, right?
Mhm.
The things that we love we're going to make this work for those things.
Yes.
um and so you end up with this really strange system that doesn't work anywhere else.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, I talk to sometimes I have to deal with entertainment lawyers who come from different aspects of entertainment. They'll come from film, they'll come from theater, they'll come from prose
Hmm.
publishing, and they all of their like ideas and suggestions about and the way they want to like alter the contracts are perfectly logical and reasonable, and I have to explain to them, if we were working in a logical and reasonable kind of industry, yeah, we could agree to that all day. But we don't, so we can't, so it's not going to happen. I mean, hey.
Let's be real.
Mhm.
This is never going to happen, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This exactly how this should go. All right. Well, you know, you talk about our research skills, and thank you. I never, I mean, I think it's just we just are interested enough that we want to dig,
Mhm.
but it was really difficult to find anything about you before '96. I get that you graduated from New York Law,
Mhm.
um, but before that, where's the little baby Gamal from? Are you in Newark or through and through?
I well, see, what you have run up against is the carefully tailored online persona that I spent
I don't want
decades
to
building.
listen.
No, 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 no,
I
no. Nope. See,
I
but
don't
no one
want.
else has ever asked a question. You
Okay,
just
good,
line it up,
fantastic.
and now.
I deal with a whole lot of paranoid cybersecurity people these days, so if you were careful about that, I don't want to break that for you.
No,
But, yeah.
well, I was born in the late 1900s, right? Here in New York.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, I went and I got all the way up to high school here before. my mother, who is originally from Jamaica, came to the conclusion that A, there was a lot of money to be made in real estate in Florida, and B, she didn't like snow. So the week
Many
after
New
I graduated,
Yorkers do, right?
right? Get,
There is a
Florida's
definite New York
basically,
to Florida
yeah,
pipeline.
Florida's
Yeah.
basically the sixth borough. It's fine.
Yes, 100%.
Right after, Staten Island.
Maybe occasionally before Staten Island.
Yeah, it all
Yeah, let's be
depends.
real. Yeah.
Well, a lot of more people I know who live in New York have been to Florida and have never been to Staten Island. So there you go.
That's
Whatever.
also very real. Yes.
And that was like a week after I graduated from high school. I was in Florida for about 6 months, and this was not like Miami. This was like Central Florida. This was close to like Disney World. And I realized if I stayed in the Orlando area after experiencing things like Union Square, Times Square, spending countless hours in Forbidden Planet and places like that. If I stayed down there, I probably would have just become a very good serial killer, right? So I went back to New York to go to college. I went to Hunter first, and then I graduated from SUNY Albany. I was 93. But 93, I went straight into law school. The law school story was I did not want to go to law school. That was not the plan. The plan was to join the State Department and the diplomatic service.
Mm.
Um,
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting alternative history.
Yes. Yeah. And my mother, who again is far more astute than I am, made a friendly wager with me. She said, if you take the LSAT, which is the test that you have to take to actually be accepted into law school, she said, take that test, and if you do well in it, you will go to law school. Because at that point, late 1900s, for all of you who don't know, all parents wanted their kids to be doctors, lawyers, or engineers. That's it.
Yep.
Even though there are a lot of other jobs in the world, even in that historical period. All right.
Sure.
I
just love the idea that the late 1900s are this historical. I'm stealing this. It makes me feel like a time traveler. Well, back in the the late 20th century,
I did not invent this, so you wouldn't be stealing it from me. And it does make a lot of Gen X people angry, so be careful where you use it.
Oh, that's fine. I'm happy. I'm happy making our own angry. We need to get our blood pressure going every now and then. You know what I mean? Start weeding this out.
Fair. So she said, if you don't do well, I'm not going to bother you about law school anymore. Now, for all of you who don't know, there's actually a course that you can take prior to taking the LSAT to help you get a better grade. I didn't take that test. There is a deadline that you have to, register to take the test. Otherwise, you're not eligible to take the test. I registered on the last day. This was back when you had to bring like number 2 pencils to the test, and you could not leave to like get a new. I brought 1 pencil. I said, if this pencil breaks, I'm out, and I'm not doing it. So
you were determined to set the conditions for quitting.
Yeah. I took the test. The results came back, and I scored so high that I got a scholarship to law school. Right.
Okay.
Which in any other context would be a flex, except for the fact that A, didn't want to go, so how is this helping? And B, what I did not realize is something that a lot of law students don't realize, is that the LSAT, how you can perform in the LSAT has no bearing on how you will actually perform in law school. How you perform in law school has no bearing on how you will function taking the bar exam, which is what you have to take to get out of law school. And doing well in the bar exam has nothing to do with actually being useful as an attorney. So there are these distinct milestones in a legal professional career that individually are kind of useless. So I did well on the LSAT, thought, okay, then law school will probably be easy and it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. No, it was horrible. I like the entire experience for me was horrible, probably because during law school I spent a significant amount of time reading comics, not doing what I
Right.
was supposed to be doing, which probably would have made the entire experience work out better. However, because I was so into now this was the early 90s. So this was like Jim Lee,
Yeah.
Todd McFarlane. This was the birth of Image. All of these things were happening.
Yeah.
Who's reading law books when this is happening? What are you talking about? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Why would I be reading law books? Wildcats just came out.
Death Blow, Wildcats, Team 7. I mean, come on.
Come on.
Anyway, one of my colleagues, who was a much better like student than I was, got offered a job before we even graduated. Most decent law school students get in that time, the late 1900s, got offers before they left law school. I was
Yeah.
leaving I left law school. I had no offer because I A, was not a good student, B, lost a scholarship, and C, was still reading comics. So why was any good law firm going to hire me? Didn't even make sense. But she got hired a position as in-house counsel for a Japanese animation and manga company called Central Park Media.
Central Park Media.
Now, she didn't want the job because she knew she can get a much better job someplace else. But she said, I do know somebody who is actually already familiar with this industry. Now, she didn't necessarily know the difference between manga and Western comics, but for my purposes, it was fine because I walked into that interview with a more of an understanding of the comic book industry than anybody else that this guy interviewed. And I had a law degree, and I wasn't going to be that expensive because I wasn't that good of a student. So that's how I got into Central Park Media. And that put me on the track of working in comics since the late 1900s.
So you are it's the late 1900s. So my timeline, you're there for 4 years, general counsel, handling licensing, contracts, that sort of thing. How do you transition from that to Marvel? Like, where does that come in for you?
This is where the name dropping is probably going to start.
Here we go.
One of the first people I met when I was at Central Park Media was a gentleman named CB Cebulski. CB ran Central Park Media's manga division. And I worked with him, on the licensing side to actually acquire the stuff that we were going to put out. At a certain point, he left Central Park Media and he went to Marvel.
Right.
He was at some meeting with like Bill Jemis and Russ Brown and all those people, and they decided that they were going to expand Marvel was going to expand its licensing program out into Japan. Because unlike all of the other international countries that Marvel could actually reach into, Marvel had such a strong name in the rest of the world that they could just pick up the phone and call any publisher in any other country and say, okay, let's make a deal. You give us money. We'll let you publish our comics. And at that point, it was just a cash business for them because they had already put out the comic in the US.
Right.
And they had already covered the, production costs. The P&L was solid. The rest of it, if you're going to license it to Argentina and get a few $1,000s, okay, sure. It's not a big deal. But you couldn't do that with Japan because the way the Japanese did business was a very closed situation. And the negotiation rituals that the Japanese had were very specific. And if you didn't have a person who understood that, you couldn't get into that market. They knew there were a lot of people reading manga. So we were like, if we can get a small portion of those people reading, and this is when the Ultimates line was doing well. And this was when Marvel Knights was doing well. So they were like, we could get a foothold into that market because we have a lot of these products that were designed to get people who weren't steeped in the history of comics, get them into comics. So somebody went to CB, or CB went to somebody and said, I know a guy. Don't worry about it. So they called me up and said, hey, CB called me up and said, hey, go to this place, talk to this guy. He's going to give you a job. Now, remember I talked about the people who grew up on Marvel and DC Comics, and then when they got to Marvel, this was what they always wanted to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of those people. Like at 13, 14, I remember sending in some kind of pitch for a story to Marvel, because at 13 or 14 in the late 1900s, you didn't understand how comics were even made.
Right. And Jim Shooter did this exact thing. And, you know, we could all be Jim Shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. We could be 13-year-olds old and writing a comic book. Why not?
Yeah, it was, and I still remember the pitch. It was a limited series with like Sunfire and the Brood invading like Japan. That was what I was doing.
And they didn't pick that up.
No, they didn't pick that up. But they did send me the letter with the little Spider-Man in the bottom corner that says your pitch is rejected.
Well, that's good. I mean,
I held on to that for I held on to that for years. Anyway, I go into Marvel. They say, listen, we're going to make you international publishing manager, not general counsel. I'm like, I don't care. I don't need to be general counsel. Who cares?
Yeah.
What I did not realize is that international publishing manager made it sound like there was a international publishing department. There wasn't. They just gave me, they made up a job, gave me the job and put me at a manager level, but didn't put anybody under me. I had nobody working for me. I was a manager of no one, but I was in Marvel. At one point there was a replica Captain America shield that I'm almost positive Joe Quesada gave to Stephen Colbert. And I'm pretty sure that was the shield that was in my office before I left.
Okay, because I remember that. Yeah,
I did not.
I remember that.
And every time I see that, every once in a while, you see like, that damn Stephen Colbert's got my shield, but it's fine. And I was there for about 2 years because my initial job was help open up the Japanese market. But because I was international publishing manager, I also had to manage all of the other relationships we had with, international partners.
Foreign licensing.
Panini in Europe, and there was smaller publishers who worked with regional publishers in South America and stuff like that. I also had to help with the licensed goods related to the films. So when Ang Lee's Hulk came out and I got hired the week after the first Spider-Man became, like, at that point, the highest grossing film of all time. I started Marvel like a week after that. So that was like 2001.
Yeah. I remember that very well.
And there was
2001.
And there were a lot of licenses, product licenses related to the movies that I, helped out on quite a few of those on. And because that was also the period where a lot of Marvel and DC had this kind of talent exclusivity war going on. They were pulling people off the market by giving them these exclusive deals. And, we had to negotiate the contracts for all of those things where it was basically a freelance deal, but you also got a travel stipend and insurance, and you got a minimum guarantee of books, and you got an escalating page rate. And it was like, well, it says freelance deal, but
you're kind of an employee.
Well, no, the employees weren't getting all of that. So you were kind of better than an employee. You weren't getting a travel stipend. What are you talking about?
This is pre-Disney Marvel,
exactly,
right? That's a whole different thing.
Marvel was still coming out of bankruptcy at that point, but they were on an upswing with Spider-Man, and there was a lot of hype around Hulk and Fantastic Four and stuff like that. So
this was the period where Gavin Cuneo is the CEO, right? Is that what? Am I getting that right?
Well, wait. Jemis was president. Yes, I think. Yeah, Cuneo. Yes, it was around the end of his.
Not Gavin. Peter. Gavin's his son. Peter Cuneo.
Yes, Peter.
I worked with both of them at Valiant. The other person I worked with that you mentioned earlier that I think because you were doing so much licensing is you're dealing with Russ Brown every day, right? He's
Yes, Russ Brown
yeah,
is magical.
he is, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I should note, and in case he is listening to this, every year on this date, which happens as we're recording this, it's what, March 20th. I don't know how I got into his calendar that this is my birthday, but every year I get a text for him on March 20th to say, happy birthday. It's not my birthday.
Listen, he said
I
it's your
love
birthday.
Russ.
Yeah, he said.
Yes, exactly.
I have a
It's my,
very quick, funny story about Russ. You see this
yeah.
book? You see that book? My
Which,
original,
yeah, yeah,
this one, my
yeah.
original plan was to make one book. That book was going to have 4 parts. The first part was going to be the business of independent comic book publishing. The second
Uh-huh.
part was going to be the business of freelance publishing. The third part was going to be the business of creator-owned publishing. And the fourth part was going to be the business of comic book licensing. And I went to Russ's office in Valiant because I think we went to lunch or something. And I
Yeah.
told him this idea. And he said, that is the worst idea I've ever heard of in my life. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you're talking about writing a book that by definition is going to be 900 pages long. It's going to take you 12 years to write this book. It is going to weigh 35 pounds. And you are going to sell 4 of them because you are going to intimidate every potential reader with the size and complexity of this book. Here's what you need to do. He said, and I will talk to you as a comic book reader because that's essentially what you are. Make a limited series. Make one book, release that book, and then make a follow-up book. Make it separate. So that the information is related, but it's digestible by a human being. Yeah. It will take you much less time to write. It will take people much less time to read, and you will sell a lot more of them. So that's why there are 2 of these books now. And as I was writing them, I realized I don't necessarily need a licensing book. And a lot of the creator-owned stuff will probably go into the next version of this book. So Russ Brown probably saved me, I don't know, 8 years of my life and a lot of sanity.
Russ is, I mean, there was a moment when I thought I've really done this wrong. The minute I met Russ, I was like, I should stop focusing on comics publishing and stop focusing on comic book retailers and just focus on licensing, because this guy, I feel like I have access to this incredible resource in this guy. And he is, there are stories, some of them are not appropriate right now for publishing because some of them are, about active deals that I think are just hysterically funny that he was able to sell. But I mean, he can sell anything, but he's just very creative and how he puts those deals together. And I don't know, I'm always impressed with Russ. So if you're listening, buddy, someday we have to have you on the show. I think you would be an amazing guest.
Absolutely.
So you're going through this process at Marvel. You're getting to know how this goes. Is there a point where you go from being, oh, I suppose I'll be a lawyer, to, oh, I suppose I'll be general counsel for your, manga. Oh, well, I'm working at Marvel. This is great. But at some point you decide to not just, kind of Forrest Gump your way into this career. You decide I'm going to be a lawyer. And I will tell you that I have this personal pet theory that nearly every lawyer I've ever met is just miserable, because they all just are kind of angry, because they spend all their days just focusing on minutia and fighting with people. How is it that you don't seem to be that? Is there some part of that has made this sustainable for you?
Oh, absolutely. First, the reason why most lawyers, especially in a professional context, are very contentious and very kind of argumentative is because they spend a lot of their time with interacting with other lawyers. I very rarely talk to other lawyers. Most of the time, I'm talking to artists, I'm talking to writers, I'm talking to entrepreneurs, I'm talking to creative people, I'm talking to a playwright or a film producer or someone who's developing an indie video game. These people are amazing. You talk to
Yeah.
these people all day, and most of them like drinking. So what is could possibly be the problem? The other thing is, and there are some attorneys who like the number of people who specifically focus on comic books as a legal career is probably only like 5 or 6 people
Right.
out of like tens of thousands of lawyers, hundreds of thousands of lawyers that are in America. But the ones who are in comics, whether it's because they're, comics adjacent or they're just in comics, most of them at some point thought they wanted to be comic book writers and then realized that either A, they weren't good enough to be a comic book writer, so don't do that. Or B, they looked at the numbers and said, there's no way I can live being a comic book writer, so I'm going to go be the lawyer part. So
Yeah.
there is a certain amount of frustrated creativity that comes with being an attorney. I think any entertainment attorney on a certain level, they want to produce, they want to direct, they want to do something, but they may not have that outlet. I have that outlet because I started a publishing company, and anytime if I want to do a new project, like right now, I'm working on a novella that I will probably. I don't know if I'm going to crowdfund it or not. I don't know if it's going to be a web novel. I have no idea, but I'm in the development stage. It's fine.
Right.
But there's the audiobooks, there's the novels, there's all sorts of creative outlets that I give myself because I don't think you can spend that much time around creative people and not at some point decide I'm going to try to do something.
That's interesting. I feel like I've gone the other direction in that when as a kid, I've been a reader my whole life, and I wanted to be a writer, and I've written stuff in the past. And I think I got to know writers and got to know like specifically what it takes to be a successful writer.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was what maybe I think the piece of it that I think that you have that I kind of feel like maybe I might want a piece of is this that you've removed the stakes of success, right?
Oh yeah,
For you, it is you don't have to become the next Jeff Lemire.
right.
You can just be Gamal doing what you love to do, right? I
Yeah,
think that's wonderful.
I think I may have stolen this concept from Oscar Wilde. I don't know who I stole the concept from, and part of it is when you help other people build their business models, especially in comics, you realize, okay, if I'm going to express my creativity fully, there is an inverse relationship to how much cash I'm hoping to bring in from the project. Because if I want to make 6 figures from my script, I have to be a screenwriter. If I'm going to be a screenwriter, that means I have to get into writers' rooms. That means I have to accept notes. That means whatever my idea was when I first had it is not going to be what actually winds up on the screen. It may not ever wind up on any screen, but I get to eat and I'm not homeless. Or I can have an actual other job that pays the bills. And then whatever I write can be whatever I write for. And if it sells a few copies, great. If it doesn't, that's fine because the work is then out there. And, from a long term perspective, I've actually created the intellectual property and it's all, protected by copyright. So if someone else later on, because this is another thing that I don't think a lot of comic book creators, especially when they were seeking what we call the maybe movie model, they don't understand the timeline that it takes from decent comic to great comic to feature film to TV series. Like if you look at just last week or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Brave New World came out. What year was Red Hulk introduced in comics? Just as a trivia question. It was probably the mid 90s, maybe the 2000s.
Yeah.
Which means the largest comic book IP entity in America. It still took them 2 decades to get that project from the page to the screen. we're talking about, Daredevil season 4 comes out and they just introduced, well, they're about to introduce Muse. Muse is at least 10, 15 years old, and
Mm-hmm.
Daredevil itself is from the 60s, 70s. So it's not like you can, because used to have a lot of creators come to me and say, well, I'm going to make a comic, singular, and then I'm going to get a Netflix deal. What is so to walk people through the reality of
What
that's
sort of
not the way.
blackmail do you have on the
Yeah, because in that
executives
case,
at Netflix?
you don't have to even make a comic if that's what you're going to do to
Right.
explain people the reality of the comics to movie pipeline, of which it's not actually a pipeline, is one of the things that you have to kind of disabuse people of, a notion that that a comic book is a backdoor key to Hollywood, or that a comic book series is just a, I don't know, a license to print money. It's a license to spend money. I mean, you could absolutely spend a lot of money if you want to make
You can
comics.
spend a lot of money.
It could be awesome. Spend all kinds of money.
And if you're ready to spend a lot of money, might I direct you to pranadm.com, where we can help you decide, or comics experience, or creative. I'm sorry, I got the company name wrong. Creative contract consulting. Perhaps one of those, or all three. Frankly, I think we could all help you.
See, there you go. There you go.
All right, so let's. I think we've hit that. So 2004, you're working there. You work with Russ Brown.
I left
in.
I left at the end of the middle of 2003, end of 2003. So 2004, it was when I was still trying. Well, okay, 2004, I decided, for reasons that I do not actually remember, that I left Marvel, and then I decided that I was going to open up a nightclub.
Okay.
All right.
That is a twist I was not expecting. Okay.
Yeah, and then I started doing the research on like real estate and liquor laws and pricing and investment. And in my research, came to the conclusion that there was a magazine, and again, this was the early 2000s, so there were still magazines.
Yeah.
There was a magazine for almost every interest that anyone ever had, except there was no specific magazine for the nightlife industry or the nightlife business. You had things like Time Out, but that was basically for restaurants and attractions. Nightlife was like one small piece. I was going to start this nightlife magazine right around the time that high-speed internet became a thing and magazines completely imploded. Right?
Yeah.
So I spent a few years wasting time, is basically what I did.
Okay.
And that's when I started the publishing company, which is why it's called Nightlife Publishing, because it wasn't supposed to be publishing books, and I was supposed to be publishing nightlife magazines, and it never did because magazines were not a thing at that point. So
crazy. That's a wonderful digression. I am so happy that you have, because it feels like like I said, it feels like you just Forrest Gumped yourself into being the perfect version of you for this. And the fact that you have that digression, I think that is wonderful.
But that digression led me to the magazine. I tried to put the magazine online. That didn't work. And then I tried to do that actually led me to writing my first book. My first book is actually called Seize the Night. And it is a nonfiction book about the business and cultural impact of nightlife on New York City. Because I felt that nightlife is something that is kind of taken as a given, especially in a place like New York City. You just assume it's there and it's always going to be there, but there's a lot of political, financial, and other types of pressure on that industry, especially back when people still went out, that I was trying to explain in that book. But what that book actually helped me do is understand how to write a nonfiction book. So when I
Yeah.
went to write The Business of Independent Comic Publishing, okay, this is not my first book. It's actually my eighth book. So it's not that big a deal. Let's just write a book. It just
Right.
happens to be twice as big as all the other books. It's,
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. All right. Well, so at what point do you decide to come back into comics then? Like, so, I mean, I'm assuming you're trying and failing, trying and failing.
Mhm.
Is it just, well, I just got to go back to the thing I know, or is there something
No,
else that draws
what
you in?
was happening was there was quite a few people that I still knew in comics. And this is when people were starting to break away from the larger companies and kind of trying to do their own thing, figuring out, can I actually publish a zine? Can I actually publish my own comic? Can I make a publishing company? And it started as a trickle at first. It was all people starting in fits and starts. Maybe I'll do this deal. Maybe I'll try to get a deal with Image. Maybe I'll try to get a deal with Dark Horse or something like that. And then it just started that business itself started to grow. And then I looked at, one day I took a look at where my money was actually coming from. And I said, hey, wait a minute. I'm actually making money representing people in comics. And I sure as hell am not making money with this nightlife thing. So
Yeah.
maybe we should kind of slowly segue into that. And it was in 2012 I launched the website and I started actually writing about how the law and how business impacts you as a comic book creator. Because I felt like a lot of the people that I was talking to, because I assumed without any basis of knowledge that someone coming out of school from a comic book like program in a college university, there had to be some kind of business education that went along with that. But I quickly was disabused of that notion when I realized no one that I was talking to had any idea how the legal side actually works. So I started to write about it I started with a blog and started getting like podcast interviews and things like that. And that's when the business, like 2, 3 years after that's when the business really started to take off. And then I realized that I was doing a disservice to a lot of the clients because I was helping them with the legal side. So they had their incorporation, they had their copyright forms, they had their contracts, they understood what to do and what not to do in terms of signing something, but they didn't understand project management, they didn't understand marketing, they didn't
Yeah.
understand sales, they specifically did not understand sales in the comic book industry, which is where 2015, 2016, I decided I needed to actually provide more of a holistic service. So it's not just the legal side, but also helping them on the business side so they knew what kind of deals to get into in the first place before they came to me with a contract that was for a deal that they really shouldn't have been in the first place because it didn't fit what they wanted to do. But since they didn't articulate what they wanted to do, they were coming to me with a deal that for someone else it might be good, for you it's not. So
Yeah.
that's so it all kind of gelled into this concept so that by 2018, 2019, the ball was actually rolling quite well.
It's interesting. I know that there's one project that I was working on that I even had you get started on a contract for and then realized that this was not going anywhere. And so much of what we do in comics is unlike any other business.
Mhm.
And contracts are really about, if you do this, I'll do that.
Yes.
Right. At their basis. And so much of what we're having to do inside of the business of comics is essentially making that up as we go.
Mm-hmm.
That is its own unique challenge, isn't it? Like trying to see ahead. If you do this, I'll do that. But we never thought about this other thing that we're probably going to end up having to do,
Yeah. And that's one of the spaces that lawyers who come into comics from the outside, they have trouble with because a lot of other entertainment processes, the process of creating entertainment is fairly fixed and standardized. Like if you're going to go make a movie with a Hollywood studio, most of the people involved in that process know exactly how it's going to go. There's not going to be a whole lot of weird things. And if there are, it's going to hit the entire industry at once. like streaming. Like there were a lot of deals set
Right.
up so that people got, box office bonuses. Oh, but we're going straight to streaming now. Nobody knew about it, so everybody got hit with the same thing. In comics,
Yeah.
because there's so many different ways to produce a comic, there's so many different ways to release a comic, there's so many different ways to get paid for a comic or to not get paid for a comic, and there's so many different permutations that if you're doing the contract, first of all, your contracts are constantly going to be kind of evolving. I work with a few clients on a long term basis, and every year, year and a half, we've got to basically sit down, break down the contract, and go, okay, some of these provisions do we not need anymore? Which ones do we need to change? Because every single time we send it out, somebody wants to change it. And what things do we need to put in that weren't in because it wasn't a thing like 5 years ago? Like, for example, put in the NFT stuff. Oh, take out the NFT stuff. Or did we ever actually need the NFT stuff? That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, that has to be fascinating. And I think that we talked, I think even before we started recording, we talked about how it's an ever shifting landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't engage with it on an ongoing basis, you're going to miss something. There's no way around it.
And
right?
the problem is especially for independent comics or even for corporate comics, there's a production cycle where you may, have your head down working on the actual creative of your book for months at a time. And hold on a second. Glare. There you go. For months at a time. And then when you lift your head back up to kind of put your book out into the world itself has changed. One of the things that we highlight in Comics Experience is editorial and executive moves within comic book companies, because you may have had a good meeting with an editor at a con and he or she or they were very interested in your book. You went back to kind of tighten it up, get the pitch together, get ready to send it, and that editor is no longer at that company, or
Right.
that company is no longer there,
or that company is owned by another company.
Exactly.
And yes.
And they just announced a book that is substantially similar to the book that you're going to do. So they're not going to take your book anymore. And if you're not aware of that, at least on a tangential basis, like things shift. You and I were talking before we started recording, how in the book I put in a significant chapter on how to get position your book to be accepted by Diamond. And then COVID happened, and then Diamond shut down. And now Diamond is where Diamond is now. But that chapter is still in the book. It's like, oh, this you got to do this. You got to like submit this form. You got to, not a thing anymore.
No.
So understanding how the industry changes and how the most specific part, because we have a live question and answer session in Comics Experience every week. And the goal of that session is not to help people understand what's happening in the industry, because we send out those bulletins all the time on Discord and email and everything else. The goal is to help people understand how those changes will or won't affect the book that you are working on right now. Yeah. So like if we've got quite a few creators who they are, webtoon focused. And so a lot of the Diamond bankruptcy stuff doesn't really affect them. However, when Webtoon went public last year and announced how much they were losing every quarter, okay, now that's about you now. Now you have to kind of pay attention. So we try to give everyone what they need for the situation they're in, so that they can like move forward with more confidence.
It's funny you mentioned that. I just earlier today was met for the first time. I don't know why, but met with Sandy Resnick, and we were talking about how my life is comics. Like my life is the business of comics, and that's what I talk about 90% of my day. And yet, Webtoons is just this like big gray. I don't even. It's not even a black hole in my peripheral vision. It's just not even there. And yet I run a fairly successful business. I work with really successful clients. We just haven't really dealt with it yet. It's this whole other comics industry that it is, that if you don't, you just put your nose down and never even look at it, which is fascinating. Like when you and I were starting off in the business of comics, there was one business of comics.
Yes.
Right. And now there is just there's so many different parts of this elephant that you could describe your part of the elephant to an absolute T. Like you could be 100% accurate and it still be completely different than someone else's experience that was also completely accurate.
Yeah,
You know,
because I mean, Sandy was also one of my clients before he got to Webtoon. But the way I like to analogize it is trying to describe to people, like, is the real estate industry doing well? Well, what are you talking about? When you,
right.
because like you can't say the real estate industry in America, because what the industry is doing in New York is different than what the industry is doing in Toledo, which is different than what the industry is doing in Dallas. And are we talking commercial? Are we talking residential? Are we talking renting? Are we talking buying? Are we talking financing? Are we talking flipping? What are we talking about?
Right.
The comics industry, especially people outside of comics, if you're talking about film or television or video games or anything else, when they think about comics, they think about one monolithic kind of entity that does not exist. There is no one monolith. There's an umbrella term that we use for comics. Like, I had a client and they worked exclusively in syndicated comics. Now, I didn't even realize that syndicated comics were still a thing. I grew up on syndicated comics, but yeah, they've got a very lucrative business working in syndicated comics. And I said, well, is it similar to Webtoon? And they said, I don't know what happens in Webtoon. And so,
yeah, 100%. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Yeah. All right, so listen, I want to dig into comics experience, but I want to not lose the narrative because we haven't even gotten to the point where you meet Andy Schmidt. And Andy, you know.
Oh yeah, we did. We passed the point where we meet Andy Schmidt.
Okay, well, fine. It's but at some point you decided. I think when I first met, you were working on this Comics Connection, and I felt like that was mostly just you trying to give some content, some activity, some community around what you're doing. And then at some point, out of the corner of my eye, I see the two of you sort of coalesce around Comics Experience. Now, I have worked with and for Andy, and actually working on a specific project with him right now, and hopefully that comes together. But so I love Andy. He's a delightful human. Where do you guys meet? How does this connection start? And then let's segue into what is Comics Experience.
Okay. Well, first, I met Andy when CB brought me into Marvel. There were a few other people that I met that I am still friends with to this day. There was Mike Martz, who wound up at
friend of the pod.
Yes, who wound up at Mad Cave after being at DC and Marvel, then DC, then Marvel, then Aftershock, then to Mad Cave.
That's right.
And Mike and I go out for Bourbon, New York Comic Con almost every year. But now we because Mad Cave's one of my clients, I'm actually interacting with him on a regular basis. So it was CB, it was Mike Martz, and it was Andy Schmidt. All of whom, now that I think about it, are very enthusiastic about Bourbon, which may be the connection. That may be it. And there was one, I think it was New York Comic Con after I started Comics Connection, and Andy had started Comics Experience about 9 years before. And his goal was to teach people the creative aspect of being in the comic book industry. So he was teaching writing and art and lettering, coloring, all of these kind of things. So again, this is going to date me from the late 1900s, but there was a very famous series of commercials for Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. One person has the chocolate, one person has the peanut butter. and then they stumble or something, and it goes together, and they realize these things actually go
You
together.
got peanut butter in my chocolate. You got
You got
chocolate in my
chocolate in my
peanut
peanut
butter.
butter. Exactly. See,
Yes.
there you go.
Uh-huh.
So I sat down with Andy over a significant amount of bourbon, and I pitched to him the idea of taking the business education that I was doing and the creative education that he was doing and putting it together into one package so that a person could, who was loved comics, was very enthusiastic about comics, but didn't know how to make comics and didn't know how to run the business of it, could come into this program and get everything they needed to know
Yeah.
and be able to talk to other people who were doing the same thing, because by and large, if you're in comics, and this is an anecdotal trend that I do not have hard numbers on, and I want to say 60% or 70% of the cases, your friends, family, or significant other has no interest in comics. So you cannot discuss with them the nuances of Final Order Cutoff Day because
That's
they
very true.
don't want to hear it. You cannot actually like ask them questions about bleed because they don't what? You
Yes.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So in the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, we formed, like Voltron, another late 1900s reference. We formed Comics Experience that brings together like what I do from the business and legal side and what he does from the creative side, and we provide a certain amount of content for the comics community at large in our podcast and a lot of the social media stuff that we do. But we have much more in-depth stuff, lessons and programs and discussions that are for our paying members, of which there are probably about 200 at this point, all of whom are in various different stages of their careers. We have some people that are just getting their first book out. We have some people that have fully functioning, publishing companies that is their whole business. They're actually making a living in comics. We
Mm-hmm.
have freelancers. We have people looking who are secured creator owned deals. We have people in like a hybrid situation that every book might be something different depending on where they are. So there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of support within the community, and a lot of cross pollination. So we have some people who are in webtoon, we have some people who are steadily in the direct market, we have some people who are primarily direct to consumer, they're doing it out of conventions, some people are doing it in libraries. All of them are sharing ideas, they're sharing techniques, and a lot of them, they've started to like work together on projects and they're collaborating with each other, and they're going to put out this book, or this one hires that one to do their marketing, and at a certain point you don't even have to do anything, you just sit there, you're like, oh, this is great, you guys are awesome.
You are legitimately the connection, right? You
Mm-hmm.
are the comics connection, as it were.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful. Well, I can tell you as somebody who's a member of the Discord, and I watch a lot of the stuff that you guys create. It is an incredible resource, and I think you guys are doing an amazing job, and I'm so happy that it is working. To that end, well, so that said, I'd love to dig into some of the issues that we're dealing with now in our industry and how things have shifted. We've talked a lot about how things have changed for comics creators
Mm-hmm.
from when you started in 2004 to now. Can we talk a little bit about, let's say you're a young freelancer, right? You're a young artist. You know this is what you want to do with your life. You know that you have enough talent to maybe you've gotten a job or something. How is a young creator, how should they be thinking about building a career if they're just starting from zero?
Mm-hmm. Well, the framework that I used in the business of freelance comic book publishing is you divide your career into 4 segments. Each segment actually builds upon the prior one to get you where you want to be. So and I make it easy so I can remember it because I'm not that smart. It's foundation, find, fee, and then finish. So You set your foundation, and by that I mean you figure out what it is you want to do in the industry and who is the best fit for what it is that you're doing. Because there are half a dozen creative things that need to be done for every comic to get out the door. There's about 12 things from a business standpoint that need to be done before a comic gets out the door. So, which one or which ones of those things are you going to be able to provide to the comic book industry? That's the first step. The second step is figure out, well, what segment of the industry are you trying to get into? Because, like we said before, you could be, if you're an artist, you could decide you're going to be a concept or character creation artist for independent comic book publishers. That's where you want to go. You don't, by definition, you don't have to worry about the rest of it, and that's fine. You could decide that you're going to do something like Superfan Promotions. They're going to actually do marketing specifically related to book releases and crowdfunding. That's their part of the business. They don't have to worry about bleed and page rates. That's not their part of the business. So once you lay out that foundation, you are targeting yourself in terms of your skills, your presentation, and your package to what it is you're going to be doing. Then you go out and find the right client for whatever it is you want to do. Whether if you're an artist and you need to do portfolio reviews and you need to actually build up your website to get to that point, figuring out which clients will work for you, which clients won't work for you, that's what you need to do. When you find a client, figuring out what you're going to negotiate in terms of the contract, what the contract actually means, what your legal and financial status is in that deal. We help you understand that, so you're not just getting a piece of paper and not understanding what or why you're signing. We help you figure out like the fee. How do independent creators get paid? What is a page rate? How do you actually set your page rate? How should your page rate increase over time? What else are you getting? Are you getting credit? Are you getting discounted copies? Are you getting points on the back end? What is it that you're getting? And do you understand what it means to get all those things or to put yourself in a position to get all those things? So once you've established yourself, you found the work, you figured out how much you're going to get paid, when you're going to get paid, how you're going to get paid. Then the last part is actually managing your time and resources so you can actually finish the projects on time. We spend a lot of time talking about if you are a freelance creator who is constantly late, you will not be a freelance creator for very long.
Well,
Because I explained the chain of how an idea actually gets put on a shelf at Midtown Comics, and how every piece has to fall into place in a certain time frame. Otherwise, on Wednesday, that book will not be there. And if the book's not there, then the retailer's upset, and then the distributor is upset, and then the publisher is upset, and they're all ultimately upset at you.
it all comes back to you because you had a
Yeah,
new video game.
exactly. Exactly. Because
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3 came out. And now
That's right. It wasn't your fault, but it's still at the end of the day.
right. So how to finish that, and also how to manage that so you are not burning yourself out. One of the
Right.
major kind of concepts, and this is kind of the reverse problem of the freelance creator who can't find work and is struggling to get a page rate and things like that. There's people on the other side, which is not necessarily a lot better, who are burning themselves out, carpal tunnel, nervous breakdowns. Like we've had people like Ian McGinty who just passed away because they were professional. They were doing good work. They took on and and then it's over.
Yeah.
Because they literally, work themselves to death. So trying to find that balance between being a conscientious on-time professional and death. So, which is there's a spot in between that you can be. And then once you've gone through those 4 steps, it's actually repeating the 4 steps at a higher level. So now your foundation is okay. How did the industry change from the last time I was working on a project? How have my contacts changed so that I can actually get more work and better work? How can my fee go up? And what can I do in the process to make it more efficient so I have more time to play video games? I mean, this is the cycle that I describe in the book.
I love that. I'm now that I had no idea that was in the book. Apparently, I need that part,
What
or
did you think was in the book?
I don't know. I don't have that version. I have this version, which I got legitimately to make sure that my clients were, checking all the legal boxes. But
Mhm.
there's so much in there. You legitimately is an incredible resource. Would you say, what you and I both talk to a lot of people who have big dreams,
Mhm.
right, and want to get involved in this and don't realize how much work it's going to be or how expensive it's going to be. You know, do you feel like that there's how do I want to ask this question? There was a there is a push pull between publishers and freelance, creators, right?
Mhm.
And it's about making sure that this product, this item, is going to be viable commercially.
Yes.
We need to make sure that our agreement with the creator leaves room for that viability, right?
Mhm.
And so there's this constant push pull of who owns it. Is this work for hire? Do you want to do work for hire? Many people don't want to do work for hire. Are we in a risky place where creators that may have value are not in comics anymore just because they don't want to have to navigate that fight, that push pull? Are we losing talent because we have essentially created a system where people feel like they have to do creator owned work, otherwise they're wasting their time, right? I don't know
I
exactly where I'm trying to poke at here. I just
No, no, no.
occasionally it feels like we're just losing that talent, you know?
I think what's happening is talent. What now? I'm not going to make them freelance talent or creator own talent at this point. I'm just going to
Sure.
say talent at this point realizes that they have options not at just the career level, but at the individual project level.
Right.
So the example that I always give is like, again, late 1900s, um, Todd McFarlane or Frank Miller or people like that who decide, well, okay, this book that I'm working on is going to be a freelance project. The benefit of doing a freelance project is you get paid relatively quickly, and your payment is not tied to the success of the book. In
Right.
fact, if you're a freelancer, you don't really care if the book comes out or not because you got your page rate and now you can pay your bills. With the creator owned situation, the benefit is if there's going to be a profit, if there's going to be media exploitation beyond the comic, you have the right to actually access some of that money. But that money may not ever come. So if you were counting on doing a creator owned deals as a living, one of the things in comics experience that we try to do is explain how to make a living in comics, but we break down each individual kind of type of comic and what that means in terms of making a living. So, to make a living as a creator owned comic book creator, you have to have half a dozen to a dozen different creator owned projects all going at the same time, all being profitable for you to make what would reasonably be referred to as a living wage. And since so
Yeah.
many creator owned artists have struggled to get one creator owned deal, the idea that you need to have half a dozen of them going multiple years and being profitable makes having a career simply as a creator owned artist or creator owned writer very challenging. I mean, it works for James Tinian, but it doesn't work for a lot of other people. Right? To be a freelancer, you also have to figure out, well, how much do I need to live? How much do I need to charge per page to get to that rate? With the understanding of you may be willing to work 40 hours a week to get your, to make enough pages, but a significant portion of the job of being a freelance comic creator is unpaid. Like when you're setting up your foundation to figure out how you're going to attack the internet, nobody's paying you for that. When you're
Right.
going to conventions and doing portfolio reviews and making connections, nobody's paying you for that. In fact, you're paying for that. When you're negotiating for your deals and chasing people for money, no one's paying you for that. It's only literally 25% of that whole 100% you have to do that's actually paid work. That's what you have to figure out, how much you have to charge per page in order to make a living. And then with independent comic publishing, you not only have to produce and sell enough profitable comics to cover the cost of the comics, you have to have enough profit to cover your living expenses. So that could be half a dozen Kickstarters a year. And if you know how much work it takes to make one Kickstarter, are you
Oof.
in a position to do half a dozen of them per year? So with all of those different financial dynamics going on, you may have writers and artists who don't want to do freelance work because they would rather have the long-term incentive of a creator-owned deal. But a creator-owned deal is a different financial animal. And if you cannot absorb that situation, then you need to, at the very least, continue to do freelance work until, whatever you're working on becomes The Walking Dead. And then you can say, whatever, you guys go to hell.
Yeah. No, it's that's a wonderful perspective, and I'm so glad that you're sharing that, because I think it is something that I've struggled with, and I think we even had conversations on this show with creators who really feel like there's no reason to do freelance work. Why would I waste my time? Well, the answer is because if you want to make a living at this, you're going to have a balance,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're going to have to find your way through that. All right. Well, thank you. As I was beginning to ask around about what sort of questions I should ask you, one of my favorites came from a buddy of mine, somebody I work with regularly, Joe Keating. Shout out to Joe. He wanted to know, what are the most misunderstood clauses or traps? I'm putting traps in quotations, but
Mm-hmm.
he did not. What are the most misunderstood clauses or traps creators should be on the lookout for in their contracts?
Yeah, this question is actually asked in various forms every time someone starts to ask questions. So I actually put together, because one of the things that we do for like the public at large is we have a YouTube channel, and I think about 2 weeks ago I laid out the idea of looking for specific clauses and traps in comics or in any contract is basically a non-starter, because there are so many different types of deals, as we've discussed, and there's so many different kinds of situations, as we've discussed, and there's so many different kind of situations that the person themselves may be in when they're looking at a deal, that it makes much more sense to look at the relationship between four key aspects of any contract. And I have four, and I've let all of these start with R because I can remember these ones. All right. So you have rights, revenue, responsibility, and recovery. So basically, what that means is you have to look at, in terms of rights, who owns what when you're making a comic. Who owns the story? Who owns the characters? What can they do with it? And who has control over it? The next thing you look at is the revenue. Who's getting paid? How much are they getting paid? When are they getting paid? And how are they getting paid? The third part is the responsibility. Who has to do what for this book to get out the door? And finally, the recovery is, what happens if this entire thing goes sideways? Once you understand each one of those four elements, you compare them to each other, then you will figure out whether you have a good or a bad deal. So, for example, if I tell you that you're going to get an option purchase deal for your comic because we're acquiring the rights to make a movie, but we're acquiring all the rights, like all the copyrights, all the trademarks, all the merchandise rights, film, TV, novel, forever in every media that is now known or hereinafter developed, you will retain nothing.
Throughout
Is
the
that
known universe.
yes,
Yeah.
throughout the known universe? Is that a good or a bad clause? I don't know. If they're giving you $3 million up front, yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
If they're giving you $3,000 up front, then that's not good. There is a relationship between those two elements. Similarly, with responsibility, if I tell you I'm giving you, let's say, $1,000 a page to draw this book, you're like, okay, that's great. Is it great? Because I need the book in 2 weeks and it's a 96-page book. Now, in the abstract, $1,000 a page is fine. It's actually fantastic. But now you've just committed suicide because you now have to create character designs, layouts, thumbnails,
You
and
just committed to not sleeping for 2 weeks. Literally not sleeping for 2 weeks.
and you will still probably miss the deadline.
Yeah.
Because they want it colored. They don't want black and white.
Right.
The relationship between the revenue and the responsibility is very important. And finally, like, look at recovery. Like, if we're supposed to pay you like 50% of the gross that comes from the book, but I never send you a royalty report, I never send you a check, and you know that the book is selling well because, Diamond and Lunar and Comicron are saying that this is the top book of the year, but we're not sending you any money.
Yeah.
Can you get your rights back? Can you get your money? If you can't, then the fact that you got that big royalty percentage is meaningless because your recovery clauses do not actually help you. Every paragraph in a contract is going to relate to one or more of those four elements. To know whether you got a good or a bad deal, you have to compare them. And in most cases, they're not going to be as extreme as the examples that I just gave. There's going to be a lot of, like, thumb on the scale type stuff that you got to figure out from deal to deal.
I just want to reiterate for anybody who is possibly going to be hired on a project of mine, $1,000 a page is a lot of money. That's a lot. Don't expect $1,000 a page, please.
I was talking more like Jim Lee, Alex Ross numbers. That's
all
not,
right.
Yeah. Although they're probably like, there's a lot more, but whatever.
Yeah. What does the phrase creator owned mean in 2025? Because that has changed a lot, and we use it to describe so many different deals now.
Yeah.
Right.
Andy and I, we call creator owned deals the most dangerous deals in comics, because, like you said, there are an infinite amount of unknowns in a creator owned deal. If you have an independent comic, you know who owns everything. You do, because it's an independent comic. If you're working on a freelance deal, you know what you own. It's nothing because it's a freelance deal. Creator-owned deals can be anything in between that. You could, if you have a lot of leverage in your negotiation and you're dealing with a company that is basically not an IP farm, you may retain a significant amount of your rights, get an advance up front, get regular reports, get people to work with you in marketing, and get the book to come out. Or you could be paying them to put the book out and not recovering any money unless the book does significantly well. You could be signing away all the rights for no revenue and no possibility of revenue in any and all media now known or created throughout the universe. You won't know because a creator-owned deal is a catch-all phrase at this stage that could mean anything. I was just talking to the American Association of Literary Agents yesterday, and they were confused about the concept of a creator-owned deal. And I said, listen, in traditional publishing, it's just called a publishing deal because the only thing the publisher wants is the right to publish the book because that's how they make their money. In comics, there are so many publishers that are banking on HBO calling them to make the comic into a movie that they know they're going to lose money on the comic. In fact, they don't even care if they make money on the comic. They just want to take your rights in the hopes that if they take the rights of 50 different comic creators, one of them will actually turn into something and justify this entire operation, the maybe movie model. Those literary agents most times don't have to worry about that because Penguin Random House does not want your video game rights. For what? They're not doing anything with them.
Right.
But a lot of the publishers that have popped up, especially pre and post COVID, especially pre-COVID, oh my God, they were everywhere. They just wanted to vacuum up as many intellectual property rights as they could because one of the downsides of the MCU is that everyone then assumed after Robert Downey Jr. said, I am Iron Man, that you can just walk into Hollywood with a comic. It's not how it works. It's never been how it works.
Yeah.
I don't blame Robert Downey Jr. for that. That's just what happened when he said it.
What can you, without just sharing details of who, can you maybe share an example of what you think is the most egregious
Yes,
deal that has been presented? Yeah.
Yes. I can actually, well, the way this deal was structured, this was a freelance deal. And one of the clauses, and this is just indicative of the rest of the contract, keep in mind this contract was being handed out to creators, international creators, many of whom English is not their first language, in 2020, late 2020, at the height of the pandemic. The artist was going to be given a page rate. That page rate was payable when 80% of the American population was vaccinated against COVID. Now, if you actually stop to, exactly, because your mind switches for this, and then you just burst into laughter because
wait, the artist is getting a page rate, right?
Yes.
The artist is doing the work.
Yes.
They invoice for the work.
Yes.
The invoice cannot be paid until 80% of the U.S. population is vaccinated against COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now.
Okay. Excellent. That's wonderful.
When this clause was brought to my attention, I used to, when I was negotiating on behalf of creators and publishers and everybody else, sometimes you read clauses and you get incredibly angry.
Yeah, I would say
because if you love comics, you want the comic creator to be able to, benefit from the fruits of their labor. You read a clause like that and you want to reach across and what? And then you have to calmly explain to them, okay, first of all, how can my client have any impact on any of the stipulations that you just put in that clause, since they're not an epidemiologist, they're a comic book artist. They have no control over if there will be a vaccine, when that vaccine will be available, who that vaccine will be available to, and they have no way to statistically prove that 80% of the U.S. population was vaccinated. I don't think we have that number now.
I don't think so either. I don't think you could. And even if you could, the politics of that number alone.
And
Yeah.
by the way, what the hell does that have to do with the pages the client already sent you? You're selling the comic whether people are alive or dead. You're selling a comic whether they're vaccinated or not. Why are you putting Centers for Disease Control tracking statistics as part of the stipulation of why my client will get paid? What are you talking about?
Oh wow. Well,
That's the most egregious one that
I
I've
love
ever
that we
seen.
have a bar now. And
Yeah. If it's less than that, it's fine. We could probably work something out. Maybe not.
was there a number of people who were signing this particular contract?
Oh yeah. Well, the hilarious part is during COVID. This was close to the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. A reporter who was doing an in-depth story on a particular company came to me and asked me to give a legal analysis of this contract, and then I read it, and I think most of my comments were about that specific clause. And I say this all the time to people: the way someone negotiates a contract and the way they write a contract is, to a certain extent, indicative of how they run their business. Your business is run, by and large, under the same concepts that you use to write your contract. So if you're writing a contract that has that stipulation, this is the way this person does business, you will not ever get paid by this person for anything, ever. Because if they are willing to put that in the contract with a straight face, then their whole business model is premeditated on not paying anyone, ever. But then 2 weeks later, people read the article, and I got one person from Italy, one person from Belgium who contacted me and said, "What should I do? I signed this contract." So yeah, it seemed like there were quite a few people, again, some of them English was not their first language, signing the contract.
That's you know what, that is I had never really thought of it that way before, but you are absolutely right. And when I think about the contracts that I have had to fight in order to work with somebody, there have been times where I think that contract is probably a good reason why you just go, okay, I'm going to go do something else.
Exactly.
Right? Even the first draft that you could probably argue against, the first draft is telling you what experience you're about to have. So that's incredible. All right, so we've covered a lot of parts of the your experience. We've covered a lot of the mechanics of how to publish. You've done a really great job of giving us very alliterative ways to remember how to not fuck this up. All of that said, I think it really leads to the ultimate question, which is, what is your favorite bourbon right now? What's your...
I actually found one, I think it was last week. I'm looking at it's called Baby Jane. They're from the makers of Widow Jane.
Widow Jane, yeah.
Widow Jane is a fantastic sipping bourbon, because in my bourbon circles, there are two types of bourbon. There's the mixing bourbon and there's the sipping bourbon. Sipping bourbon should be consumed on its own.
Yep.
Widow Jane is a very good sipping bourbon, but it has a kind of a steep price point because it's usually priced at like $95 to $110. And I have a fundamental problem about paying almost $100 for what is basically a domestic product. We're bringing in Japanese whiskey. Okay, it's imported. You got to pay more, whatever. Bourbon is American. It has to be American. Otherwise, it can't be bourbon. Why is it like so much money? But Baby Jane is about $45.50. Very good as like a fall winter type bourbon. Kind of like strong heat in the beginning, very vanilla caramel in the middle, but the finish is kind of flat. There's not a lot of, it's kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah.
But it's a good lead in and it's a good middle. So I recommend it, especially for the price point. Love
that. You are just, you're all over the place. I love that about you. Your expertise is so varied that this has been wonderful. And I cannot wait for the next opportunity to sip some bourbon with you. Will you? So, comics experience.
Mhm.
Tell folks where they can find you, the incredible amount of content that you create, and how they could be interacting with the work that you're doing.
Okay, well, my mom was very forward thinking in that naming someone Gamal Hennessy would make them very easy to find on the internet. There's not a lot of Gamal Hennessy's on the internet.
It's
So
not.
if you type it into Google, you will find me. I'm primarily on Facebook and primarily on Facebook, but I'm also on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and Threads and TikTok and Instagram. You can find me at all those places. If you want to get a free consultation on a specific legal issue that you have, you can go to creativecontractconsulting.com. It's all one word. And there's a form you fill out. We'll get you a free 30-minute consultation. And if I can help you, we'll figure out a way that I can help you. If I can't, I will at least give you some information that you can use for your next steps. Or if there's a conflict, because I being in the industry this long, you have kind of like a stable of clients and you can't work across the aisle with other clients. I have other attorneys who understand the comic book industry and I can actually refer you to them. They're all like very good and most of them smarter than me anyway, so whatever. Um Comics Experience, you can go to comicsexperience.com. You can also find Comics Experience on YouTube and on Spotify, and there's also a Facebook page for the Comics Experience community. The one other thing that we didn't have a chance to touch on because it's pretty brand new, so I forget to bring it up, is that I've started a newsletter or a program. The program is anchored by a newsletter to help fight against comic book censorship, because there are so many graphic novels and comics that are specifically being targeted in the over the past 4 or 5 years, and that's really ramping up over the past like 6 to 8 months. um Books in the library and bookstore system that are being challenged, being censored. So I'm the newsletter is going to try to bring all of that information to light and help to down the line push back against some of those censorship efforts, and that's called the Comic Book Advocate. There's Comic Book Advocate Facebook page, and there's a newsletter. But that newsletter is only once a month. It's not once a week like my other newsletter. Because I mean, come on, who has the time?
This from you, who has the time? Oh man, I'm so glad you didn't have kids. Can I just say, I think
Well,
the world is a better place that you didn't have kids.
yeah,
You because
that is the other piece, because I don't there's no one else that I need to actually make sure stays alive. So yeah, we can help people make comics. It's fine.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I can say this is if you want a pull quote, I've worked with a lot of different lawyers. I've worked with a lot of people inside the entertainment industry. I've never met anybody who so genuinely wants to help and has such very clear and, as we have seen, alliterative advice, legal advice as Gamal Hennessey. I am so glad you came on the show. I am looking forward to the next time we get a chance to hang out and the next time we get a chance to work together.
Absolutely.
So wonderful.
Absolutely. You know where to find me.
I do. And you know where to find me. I'm Adam Freeman. I am Adam Bang Freeman in some places. I'm also pranadm.com. And for anything that he doesn't do, I do. I think between us, between you, me, and Andy, there's really, you could run a whole publishing company and not even really touch it. This has been wonderful, buddy. I appreciate it. If you are not liking and subscribing at this point in the game, you've now listened to me and Gamal talk for 2 hours. What is wrong?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Ask something in the comments. That's something we haven't gotten a lot these days. Is I would love for Gamal to come back in and answer some questions on our YouTube page, because he's so good at it on the other platforms. Thanks again, buddy, and I appreciate it. This message is brought to you by the Prana Bullet. What's the Prana Bullet? It's a weekly newsletter dropped in your inbox every Friday. It's designed to keep you up to speed on that week in the comics industry. And our goal here is to keep it light, to keep it informative, and I swear to God, this is in our mission statement, easy to skim. Each week, we're always looking for the new things that we can learn about the comic book industry and share with our clients and with you. So this is the place where you can catch up on everything you might have missed. Plus, the monthly Prana bestseller list. If that sounds like the news you need, please head over to pranadm.com and sign up today. If you do, we'll see you this Friday.